Today we are going to go over the Mayflower Compact. This is another one of those documents that the Founding Fathers sort of had as a template of what they could do to create a constitution, as well as writing the Declaration of Independence. So the Mayflower Compact is exactly sort of what it sounds like. It comes from the Mayflower, which was one of the first ships that came over to the United States before it was colonized by the English and other European powers. And compact basically means that they were able to come up with an agreement on how to run these colonies before they even built them. So we're going to learn a little more information about that today, and you are going to do some activities after this presentation. So how did the Mayflower Compact establish the idea of self-government in the United States? You can ignore this do now, but this is the vocabulary that you need to know. The Mayflower Compact, it is the first governing document of Plymouth Colony, which was one of the first colonies ever created. It is considered a charter, a document which outlines the conditions under which a colony is organized. It has legislation. We've seen that word before. The act of making or enacting laws, a law or a body of laws that are enacted. They have a representative assembly. It is composed of persons duly authorized as by election to act and speak for others. This is called a covenant. It is a sacred pact, which means once they agreed on it, it is not something that could just quickly change. And it is civil body politic, one body or unit of representation. So these words you're going to see within a lot of the Mayflower Compact, but also this presentation. The Pilgrims. A pilgrim is a person who makes a journey for a religious reason. That is why we call them pilgrims. They came over from England. A lot of them had a pretty significant religious background, and they decided to make colonies here for themselves. In 1608, a group of religious farmers tried to start their own church in England. The Church of England, if you notice it's in capitals, because that's what it was, the Church of England, would not allow this to happen. The Pilgrims decided to move to Holland to find religious freedom. All right, so they start over here in England, and they go bloop, 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 over to this area over here, okay? So they're staying in Europe at this point. The Pilgrims became homesick and were missing their way of life in England, and then in 1616, they sent men to England to ask the Virginia Company for a charter to start a colony in North America. So they decided not to stay in Holland. They wanted to start a new colony in America. The Virginia Company agreed, and the Pilgrims returned to England on the Mayflower and the Speedwell. These are the two boats that they decided to go on to get to the United States. Crowded on the Mayflower, 101 men, women, and children headed to the lands governed by the Virginia Company. The Pilgrims were given free passage to America. They agreed to work for the Virginia Company. The Pilgrims would send them furs, fish, and lumber. Okay, so by going to the colonies, they were given a lot of land, and they were allowed to practice whatever religion they wanted to and farm and have their own property and build their own colony. But in exchange, they would have to provide furs, so they would have to trap animals and take their fur. They would fish, and they would also send home lumber to England, because at this point, England didn't have a lot of lumber, and they needed that. So by providing those three things, they worked for this company, but they were able to go to the United States and make money because they were sent here on a job, basically. All right, so this is what happens. They go from England, Plymouth, England, and then they go all the way to Massachusetts, and they land near where Plymouth Rock is now. Okay, if you notice, they just basically renamed a lot of their cities and a lot of their colonies after places in England. The Mayflower was blown off course by storms and reached the coast of what today is Massachusetts in December 1620. There you go, you can see the words. Okay, so they were supposed to make it to Virginia, which I'm going to go back one slide so you can see it. Virginia, okay, is down here. But because of the storms, they were blown way off course and they landed up in Massachusetts. See? This is where they're supposed to go, or this is where they ended up in Plymouth, and that's where Boston is now. And we are up here, I believe, right? Yeah, right up in here, okay? So that's where they ended up being, pretty close to like Cape Cod. The Pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock. This is a picture of what it would have looked like. This is a rock with the date on it in Plymouth. That is not necessarily Plymouth Rock. When they say Plymouth Rock, they don't really mean a rock, but they do mean a certain part of the beach that had plenty of stones and things like that. That's basically where they landed. All right, the Mayflower Compact. Let's get to the point. 41 male passengers on the Mayflower formed into a civil body politic. They signed a compact promising to write and obey just and equal laws for the general good of the colony. So before they got off that ship, they had 41 male passengers decide that we're going to basically create a quick government. We're going to write up some laws. So when we get off this boat, we set up a colony. We all have something that we need to follow. We have a general form of government to make sure everyone can follow rules. The Mayflower Compact is what was written. The compact brought an element of democracy to America and was an example of the practice of self-government in the colonies. All the colonies practice some form of self-government. So remember, they're from England. They still have a king and a queen from England. But when they're here, they don't have that government here in the United States with them. So they had to kind of create their own small government to actually have rules and laws. And that's why it's called self-government. This is what the Mayflower Compact sort of looked like. This is a typing of it. But you can see at the bottom all of the signatures for the people who agreed to it. There are 41 signatures. In making this compact, the Pilgrims drew upon two strong traditions. One was the notion of a social contract, which dated back to biblical times and which would receive fuller expression in the works of Thomas Hobbes and John Locke later in the century. The other was the belief in covenants. Puritans believed that covenants existed not only between God and man, but also between man and man. Okay, so covenants are basically an agreement. Okay, this agreement of following laws, that concept of those rights and responsibilities. The group of people will give you certain rights. You as a citizen need to have certain responsibilities to uphold those rights. The compact is often described as America's first constitution, but it is not a constitution in the sense of being a fundamental framework of government. Its importance lies in the belief that government is a form of covenant, and that for government to be legitimate, it must derive from this consent of the governed. The settlers recognized that individually they might not agree with all of the actions of the government they were creating, but they and succeeding generations understood that government could be legitimate only if it originated with the consent of those who claimed it governed. All right, what that basically means, the Mayflower Compact listed rights and it gave responsibilities to people, but it did not set up three branches of government. It did not set up whether we have a president. It did not say we have a mayor. It did not name a leader. What it did do is it said, as a group of people, we are making agreements with each other to make sure that we take care of each other and we run this colony. That is what a covenant was. The agreement that the people will help each other and set up a colony and follow rules together. Okay, so that is the first thing that they did. Our United States Constitution, which is written much later, follows that, but then also puts in how the government is set up. All right, this is once again some of the vocabulary. These are some information you may need. And that is the end of the presentation. Make sure you answer all your questions.